Yeah, and I think once you understand the structure of the Bible, a lot of this makes sense. I see those that are trying to hang on to the old covenant. I think a lot of them mean well. They're trying to be obedient, but really they're making the same interpretive mistake that the dispensationalists are making. They're just making it on the other end of the far extreme. Um, and it really comes down to a very simple idea, and that is that Jesus was born under the old covenant law. People have to get that. That's a big deal. So when Jesus is speaking, there's two parts really to Jesus's ministry. One is that he's introducing the new covenant, which is his blood. But folks have to understand, and it will really help them to unlock this, that the new covenant doesn't get started until what we call the upper room, and that's found in Matthew chapter 26, really just before he dies. And Jesus then has Passover, but he does Passover a little bit different, and he applies it to himself, and he gives the wine and says, "This is my blood." And he says, this is the new covenant, my blood, which is shed for you." And then the unleavened bread is his body, which is broken. And so he's instituting this new covenant just before his death. So Jesus really only lives in the new covenant just during that last Passion Week, as we talk about, really the last few days. And then he resurrects, and he is on the earth for 40 days, and then he ascends. And so let's kind of wrap our heads around this. So as Jesus is teaching in his ministry, there's a combination of things that Jesus is teaching. One is that he's teaching that he's the fulfillment of all that the law said. And that's another thing too. When we talk about Jesus being the fulfillment of the law, well, what does that mean? A lot of people, when they hear that, they just hear, well, he's the fulfillment of the Ten Commandments. But that's not biblical terminology. It could be in context, but many times when we're talking about the law, we're talking about the first five books of the Bible. So it means all that Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, all that it talked about, all that it prophesied, Jesus was the fulfillment of that. And so Jesus fulfilled the law, the Pentateuch, the first five books. He didn't come to destroy the law, but to fulfill the law. And so that was one part of his ministry, was fulfilling that, and he was still under that old covenant law. So you'd hear him say things like, when he would heal somebody, go and present yourself to the priest, so forth, because he was still under that system. Now, then there was also a transition to the new covenant. So you have to understand those two concepts when Jesus is teaching. If he's teaching on something about morality, then we need to listen. If he's teaching about something that has to do with ceremony, then that's being done away with in the old covenant law. And so it's not good enough to say, if Jesus said it, I'll obey it. That's you. In fact, you can't do that because there's no temple system. So anything that is associated with the temple system has been done away with, and that's what Jesus said. So you can't take the things that Jesus said in just, like we always talk about, like a fortune cookie. This verse says this, and Jesus is the author. Therefore, I'm a Christian. I'm a follower of Christ. If he said it, I do it. That's not how we're to study the Word of God. If later Jesus talks about that being a fulfillment of something, then we need to understand that that is not for us today. And so the Torah keepers, what they do is they say, if Jesus said it, then he's my leader. I'm a Christian. If Jesus said it, I do it, and they don't take into account that there's a transition happening from old covenant to new covenant. Now, the dispensationalists make the same mistake, but on the other end of the spectrum. So let me go back for a second. The Torah keepers, they don't see the apostolic commission, the commissioning of the apostles, and basically the whole book of Acts, they see as an extension of Jesus's ministry. They would say those are the exact same, and they're not. The apostles are clarifying the message of the new covenant. The Lord opened their understanding, and they're explaining the new covenant in the book of Acts. Okay, that's why you see sometimes there's clarity in Paul's writings that is a little bit vague in Jesus's ministry. The gospel's the same; it's still by grace through faith. But the Torah keepers will say, "Well, if Jesus said it, I do it," and they also then kind of minimize the progressive revelation or the opening of the understanding of the apostles later. So that's their error. And the dispensationalist error is the exact same, but on the other side, other end of the spectrum. They say, well, all the apostles were a part of the old covenant, and only Paul is my apostle, and I only listen to him and I don't listen to any other apostle. And so they're making the same mistake, but on the other end of the spectrum. So I'm in the middle of those where I'm saying, hey, I want to understand how the covenants work, that there's a doing away of the old covenant and an entering in of the new covenant, and we want to understand what does that baton passing off look like in the book of Acts, and that will help us to decipher what's being said in fulfillment of the old covenant and an introduction into the new covenant. Once you get it, it's not really guesswork. Once you get it, it's pretty simple, but bad teaching has really confused us, and so those two systems are polar end of the spectrum.